For some analysis on this very busy week, we turn to our political panel. Julie Pace is the Washington bureau chief for the Associated Press. Ramesh Ponnuru is a senior editor at the National Review. We're also joined by Ron Brownstein, the senior editor of The Atlantic and a CNN senior political analyst, and Ezra Klein is the founder and editor at large of Vox.com. Ramesh, let me start with you. The tax cut, looks like it's going to passage and signed by the president. So big win for the president. What's your take on it?
It's not just a big win for the president, it's his only major legislative win so far. And I think that is the thing that led to its happening, because Republicans were just desperate to get something across the finish line and be able to tell people that they've accomplished something while in office. So I think it is a big accomplishment. It does achieve several long-standing Republican goals, particularly bringing down that corporate tax rate, which is what this entire bill is designed around.
Ron, how does it shake out in terms of the effects of this bill, do you think?
You know, normally passing a tax cut is like playing tennis without a net in terms of the public reaction. People like the idea. This tax cut is facing 2-to-1 opposition in polling. 60% of Americans in Quinnipiac said it would benefit the rich at the expense of the middle class, which is pretty tough language. And there are reasons for that. I mean, it will increase the deficit by at least $1 trillion in the most optimistic estimates after growth. It puts most of its benefits, 62% by some estimates, into the top 1%. And all of the studies have shown it will have relatively limited impact on accelerating growth. But that, I don't think, is the reason why it is at risk. It's at risk because it departs from earlier tax bills in raising taxes on certain targets. Right. People who live in big cities, people who live in blue states. It cuts taxes for alternative energy while preserving them for oil and gas. In many ways, it is as much an enemies list as a tax bill. I mean, it is a clear expression of these are the people on our side. This is other people on the other side, and that I think exposes us to much more political risk than you usually see in a tax bill.
As we're picking up on Ron's point, I was struck when Leader McConnell said, well, we'll see how popular it gets once it passes. Chuck Schumer in 2010, after the Affordable Care Act passed, said, when people learn what's actually in the bill, as this goes along, it's going to become more and more popular. So they've really just switched teams.
Well, there are two actually interesting things about that, because two things happen here. One is that recently Obamacare has gotten a lot more popular. Yeah. It's become a majority popular bill for the first time since its passage, since Trump got elected. But the other thing this tax bill does is, on the way to passage, it casually destabilizes the entire individual insurance market in America. So the Republicans had skinny repeal at the end of the Obamacare repeal effort. The main provision of skinny repeal was that they're going to repeal the individual mandate and not really replace it with anything. They knew that was a bad idea. And so the idea was it could only pass if Republicans promised they wouldn't make it law. They would change it at conference. But right now, they've passed a tax bill that, on the way to passage, it gets rid of the individual mandate. According to the Congressional Budget Office, 13 million people will lose health insurance. Insurance premiums will go up by 10%. Individual markets will be much more destabilized. And they don't have an answer for this. So in addition to a tax bill that is incredibly regressive, has all the features Ron just mentioned, it's also going to upend American health insurance markets. And they've not really thought hard about this or what to do about it or how to handle it at all. It's something they did to get a little bit of revenue and didn't really think through on the way to passage.
What's your take, Julie, on this?
Well, politically, big win for the president and Republicans if they can get through the conference process, and they have every political incentive to try to move through that process pretty quickly. I think one of the big things that we have to look at over the next year or two as the president heads toward 2020 is, what is the impact of this legislation on his voters? He has made sweeping promises to his voters, working class voters, that they are going to get big tax cuts. There's going to be a lot of tape for Democrats to go back to. If you look at a lot of the analysis that's come through, yes, many middle-class Americans will get some kind of tax cut. Some may not, and for some, it may be fairly minimal. So he's putting a lot of his own political capital into a piece of legislation that may not bring the kind of success for his voters that he is promising right now.
One intriguing marker in this, if you go back and you look, 25 Democratic senators voted for the Reagan tax cuts in 1981. 12 Democratic
86.
senators. 81. The original 81. Oh, 86. Everybody voted for it. Both parties. It was 90 plus votes. 25 Democratic senators in 81. In 2001, 12 Democratic senators voted for the Bush tax cuts. When this started, there was a lot of expectation that because there are 10 Democrats running in 2018 in senators in states that President Trump carried, that he would have a lot of leverage to get them to vote for it. this bill is so tilted toward Republican constituencies relatively narrowly at the top that no Democrat felt compelled, even in states that Trump won by double digits, to vote for it. In stark contrast to 01. Anyway, I understand politics has changed since the 80s and even since 01, but this is not something that they were afraid of opposing, both because of the politics and because of the substance.
And because Trump is less popular than most presidents are.
You can respond to that,
but North Dakota, West Virginia, we're talking about here.
But Ramesh, you wrote this week about an effort by Senator Rubio and Senator Lee to try to build up the families at the lower end of this. Why was there resistance to what they were trying to do? There's also other things. Paul Ryan has been a fan of increasing the EITC for childless.
Right.
You could have lowered the rates at the bottom. Why were those, which would have been direct, injections into the middle class and lower class, why were those so hard to get through?
Right. So they weren't the priority for Republicans. Senator Mike Lee and Marco Rubio tried to make payroll tax relief possible for families by extending the child credit to them, and pay for that by just increasing the corporate rate less than 1%. Republicans were just dead set against it, 32 of them, saying that we had to keep this 20% rate, that's somehow written in stone. And the Democrats, by and large, decided they did not want to participate in this bill. They could have carried that across the finish line if they had wanted to.
Ezra, let me go back on the health care question. Susan Collins, as a trade for her vote, said that Mitch McConnell promised her that Alexander Murray, the bill being used to kind of try to stabilize the Affordable Care Act, of course, before the individual mandate was being taken away. Give me your sense on that. And McConnell has committed to that, to bringing that up.
Alexander Murray was designed to deal with some problems that are in Obamacare now, and also the Trump administration's continuing sabotage of Obamacare, particularly the expectation they're going to stop paying the cost-sharing reductions. You cannot pass Alexander Murray after blowing a giant new hole in it. Alexander Murray doesn't fix that. It's not built to fix that. It's not powerful enough to fix that. So, I mean, you can even, these are percentages pulled out of nowhere, but you can imagine if Alexander Murray stabilizes the individual markets by 15%, the individual markets destabilizes them by 40%, you have a net worse individual market. This was not a trade that ever made any sense. It's a fig leaf. It's a way of saying that you're doing something without having any idea of what you're actually doing.
Can I get back to Julie's point
quickly?
Real quick about the economic impact of the tax bill. I mean, essentially, you have a Republican coalition now that depends largely on the votes of blue-collar, lower-middle-income whites, and who Trump is speaking to very powerfully on a cultural basis. But you have a tax bill that tilts even more toward the top 1% than the Bush tax cut, gave about a quarter of its benefits. This is about 3/5. And the question is, can they hold those blue-collar voters? Well, one way they're doing it is by ramping up, even relative to Bush or Reagan, the cultural antagonism and even the kind of overt kind of racial element in the message. The problem they're getting is that that's pushing away more people at the top. And if you had to predict for 2018 what's a bigger risk, blue-collar people thinking they violated their interests or white-collar people thinking they're violating their values, I'm betting on the latter. That's what we saw in Virginia. That's what we're seeing in Alabama. And the blue-collar side is holding so far for the Republicans.
But the tax bill does reduce taxes on average, including for blue-collar people. The question is, are they going to be upset that other people get a bigger tax cut than they do? And my guess is the Republican bet is that they don't.
Until that expires, right? Until those parts of the bill expire.
The people who are recoiling from Trump on cultural grounds will also face higher taxes in blue states. And there are still a lot of Republicans in Southern California, New York, New Jersey, Northern Virginia, suburbs of Minneapolis, and Chicago who will be at risk in this bill from voters who are readily pulling away from them on the cultural and racial grounds.
All right, let's switch here to Julie, let's switch to Michael Flynn. What do we make of this? I mean, obviously it's a big deal. What's your take on it?
It's a huge deal. And the White House is leaning hard on this idea that in the actual court documents that came out at the end of the week, there is no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. That is true based on what is in the court documents. But I think Senator Graham made a good point. If that is Mueller's aim, to see if that collusion existed, he now has the witness a cooperating witness that he needs. Michael Flynn was by Trump's side throughout the campaign. He was flying on Trump's plane with him. He was with him behind the scenes. He was a major player in terms of their formation of policy, such as it was. And I think the other thing that is significant about the court documents is that it undermines the entire White House argument about why Flynn was fired. They said Flynn was fired essentially because he was freelancing in his conversations with the Russian ambassador. He lied to Mike Pence about it, and he did this on his own. Those court documents say that he was actually in direct conversations with Jared Kushner and with KT McFarland, who was part of a larger group, talking about conversations they were going to have with the Russians. We haven't heard a good explanation from the White House about that right now, but it's very clear that Flynn was not the only person during the transition who was aware that they were going to be talking policy with Russian officials.
Transition policy.
To make one just big point about this, if you just step back from Flynn, from Manitos, from everything we're hearing, from the meetings at Sessions forgot, all the times Kushner lied on his security clearances, there's a lot being forgotten about, lied about, misrepresented, for it all to be innocent. I mean, there's some, but we don't know the whole story yet. Mueller is running what appears to be a very expansive and very aggressive investigation, but it is getting to be, what we are being asked to believe as innocent is getting to be almost ridiculous. You go back to the Don Trump Jr. emails with a Russian lawyer saying, I would love to get some dirt on Hillary Clinton. There's an overall picture coming together here. And for a group that says they have nothing to hide, there sure is a lot they appear to be trying extremely hard, at great legal risk, to hide.
Ramesh.
So, you know, we all want to know what this means for the future of the Mueller investigation. So obviously, because this is a plea agreement, that means that Mueller thought that he could charge Flynn with more than that, and that he wants Flynn's cooperation. So of course we all want to know what the future holds here. But one thing that we can easily skip over is this just shows terrible judgment on the part of somebody who was the national security advisor, and therefore also shows terrible judgment on the part of the person who hired him. The administration's sending out these press releases where they say, oh, this was an Obama guy, Flynn, and of course Flynn did work in the Obama administration, but the Obama administration warned the Trump people not to hire him. They went ahead anyway, and it really just shows, again, abysmal judgment from a president who always said he was going to surround himself with the best people.
One thing we know about the special counsel is he does not give out hall passes easily. There was a lot he could have charged Michael Flynn with that he did not charge him with. And the assumption has to be there's a reason why they made that call. The other thing we know about the special counsel, there's a lot we know, there's a lot we don't know. They know a lot more than we do. They may know a lot more than the people they're interviewing do. And I think that limits our ability to truly understand where this is going, except every indication is that this is a very serious, aggressive, and comprehensive investigation.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks to all of you, and we'll be right back in a moment.